The auctioneer's gavel struck down hard just as Margaret Warren placed her final bid, and the collective laughter that erupted from the crowd of men gathered in Yankton's town square made her cheeks burn with humiliation, though she kept her chin high and her shoulders squared. It was September of 1876 in the Dakota Territory, and the assembled ranchers and businessmen clearly found it hilarious that a 23-year-old woman from Philadelphia would dare purchase the most run-down property in the county. $500 for the Thornton place. One grizzled rancher called out, "Madam, that land ain't worth 50, let alone 500. Better hope you brought a tent, lady," another man jeered, "because that house is about to fall clean through itself." Margaret signed the papers with trembling hands, trying to ignore the mocking voices surrounding her. She had traveled nearly 1,500 miles with every penny she had saved from 5 years of teaching school. Determined to start fresh after her father's death, had left her with nothing but debts and bad memories. The advertisement for the auction had reached Philadelphia 2 months ago, and something about the description of the Thornton Ranch had spoken to her soul, even if the listing had been brutally honest about its dilapidated condition. The town clerk, a portly man with sympathetic eyes, handed her the deed. "Miss Warren, I have to ask if you are certain about this decision. The property has been abandoned for 3 years. Old man Thornton drank himself to death, and the place went to ruin long before that. No water rights, fences down, house barely standing, and the barn burned 2 winters ago." "I am quite certain, thank you," Margaret replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. She folded the deed carefully and placed it in her satchel, then gathered her skirts and walked through the still chuckling crowd toward the livery stable where she had arranged to rent a wagon. The livery owner, a younger man with kind hazel eyes and sun-weathered skin, was preparing the wagon when she arrived. He was tall and lean, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn shirt, and he moved with the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life working with horses and physical labor. When he looked up and saw her approaching, he straightened and removed his hat. "Miss Warren, I am Samuel Brennan. My father owns the livery, but he asked me to prepare your wagon personally." He gestured to a sturdy buckboard loaded with the trunks and supplies she had shipped ahead from Philadelphia. "I heard about your purchase at the auction." Margaret braced herself for more mockery, but Samuel's expression held only curiosity and perhaps a touch of concern. "I suppose you think I am foolish as well," she said quietly. "I think you are brave," he replied, surprising her, "though I would be lying if I said I did not have concerns." "The Thornton place is in bad shape, Miss Warren, real bad shape. Do you have experience with ranch work?" "None whatsoever," she admitted, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. "But I have read extensively about animal husbandry and land management. I brought books." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, something that might have been admiration or might have been pity. "Books are a fine start, but this land has a way of teaching lessons that no book ever covered. The ranch is about 8 miles northwest of town. The road is rough, and you will want to arrive before dark. May I offer you some advice?" Margaret found herself nodding, grateful for any guidance that did not come wrapped in condescension. "Do not try to do everything at once," Samuel said, his voice earnest. "The first night, just find a safe place to sleep and take stock of what you have got. Come morning, make a list of what needs doing and what needs doing first. Those are usually 2 different things out here." "That sounds like wisdom earned through experience," Margaret observed. "My family has ranched in the territory for 12 years, Samuel explained. "Lost our spread to a bad winter and bankers' greed 4 years back. Now I work for my father at the livery and do ranch work for others when they need an extra hand. I know what it takes to survive out here, and I know what it takes to fail. The difference is usually just stubbornness and the willingness to accept help." Margaret studied his face, searching for the trap, the joke, the inevitable revelation that he was mocking her too. But she found only sincerity in his weathered features. "Why are you being kind to me when everyone else thinks I am a fool?" Samuel settled his hat back on his head and gathered the wagon's reins. "Because everyone thought my father was a fool too when he came out here from Missouri with nothing but hope and determination. And maybe you are foolish, Miss Warren. But I have learned that the folks who do extraordinary things are usually the ones everyone else called crazy first. Besides, I do not think someone who traveled halfway across the country alone to bid on a broken-down ranch is the type to give up easy." He helped her onto the wagon seat, his hand steady and respectful, and showed her how to properly hold the reins. "These are good horses, steady and reliable. They know the way to the Thornton place. Just keep them at an easy pace and let them pick their path. If you run into any trouble, fire 3 shots in the air. Sound carries far out here and most folks will come running." "I do not have a gun," Margaret confessed. Samuel's eyebrows rose, but he did not comment. Instead, he walked back into the livery and emerged a moment later with a rifle and a box of ammunition. "This belonged to my mother. She passed 2 years ago. I think she would have liked knowing it went to another woman brave enough to make her own way out here. Consider it a loan until you can purchase your own." Margaret felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. "I do not know how to shoot." "Then I will teach you," Samuel said simply. "But not today. Today you need to get to your property and see what you are working with. I will ride out tomorrow afternoon to check on you if that is acceptable." "You would do that?" Margaret asked, surprised. "Miss Warren, out here we help our neighbors. That is how we all survive. You are my neighbor now, whether the others want to accept it yet or not." He secured the rifle beneath the wagon seat and stepped back. "One more thing. There is a creek that runs along the eastern border of the Thornton property. The water is good and clean. That is going to be your lifeline until you can get a well dug. Do not waste it, and do not let anyone tell you that you do not have rights to it. Old man Thornton may have let those rights lapse, but they belong to the land, not to him." Margaret gathered the reins, her heart beating fast with fear and excitement and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Your kindness means more than you know." "Just Samuel, please," he said with a small smile. "We do not stand much on formality out here." "Good luck, Miss Warren." "Margaret," she replied. "If I am to call you Samuel, you should call me Margaret." His smile widened just a fraction. "Safe travels, Margaret." The wagon lurched forward, and Margaret focused all her attention on controlling the horses and navigating the dusty road leading out of Yankton. Behind her, she could feel Samuel's eyes following her progress, though she did not dare turn around to confirm it. The September sun was hot on her shoulders, and the vastness of the Dakota Territory stretched out before her in rolling hills of prairie grass that shifted like golden waves in the wind. The first 2 miles passed easily enough, but as the road deteriorated into little more than wagon ruts through the grass, Margaret began to understand why everyone had laughed. This was not the civilized countryside of Pennsylvania, with its neat farms and established roads. This was raw, untamed land that cared nothing for her plans or her determination. The isolation pressed in on her, vast and overwhelming, and for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake, but she had come too far to turn back now. The money was spent, the deed was signed, and she had nothing to return to even if she wanted to retreat. Philadelphia held only the memory of her father's declining years, the shame of his gambling debts, and the pitying looks of people who had once respected the Warren name. At least here in this wild territory, she could fail on her own terms. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when the Thornton Ranch finally came into view, and Margaret had to suppress a gasp of dismay. The descriptions had been accurate, perhaps even generous. The house was a small structure of weathered wood, leaning distinctly to the left, with half the roof shingles missing and one wall that appeared to be held up by nothing more than habit. The barn was indeed burned, reduced to a few charred posts and a pile of collapsed timber. Fencing lay in tangles across overgrown fields, and what might have once been a corral was now just a collection of broken posts. But the land itself was beautiful. The prairie stretched out in every direction, painted gold and amber by the setting sun, and she could hear the distant sound of running water that must be the creek Samuel had mentioned. The air smelled clean and fresh, so different from the coal smoke and crowded streets of Philadelphia. Despite the overwhelming work ahead, Margaret felt something loosen in her chest, some tension she had carried for years finally beginning to ease. She guided the wagon to a stop in front of the house and sat for a long moment, simply taking in the reality of her situation. Then, remembering Samuel's advice, she climbed down and began to explore. The house was worse inside than out. The floor sagged dangerously in the main room. There were holes in the walls large enough to admit small animals, and the fireplace was clogged with debris. But one corner of the single room appeared relatively sound, and the roof above it seemed intact. Margaret carefully tested the floorboards, found them solid enough, and began unloading her belongings. She worked until full dark, moving her trunks inside and creating a small camp in the safest corner. She had packed blankets, a small oil lamp, basic cooking supplies, and enough food to last a week. As the prairie darkness descended, complete and absolute in a way city darkness never was, Margaret lit her lamp and ate a cold supper of bread and cheese. The night sounds were unlike anything she had experienced before. Coyotes called in the distance. Strange chirping and clicking filled the grass, and the wind moved through the broken house with eerie whistles and moans. Margaret wrapped herself in her blankets, placed the unloaded rifle beside her as a comfort even though she had no idea how to use it, and tried to sleep. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to brilliant sunlight streaming through the gaps in the walls. Her back ached from the hard floor, her muscles protested every movement, and when she stepped outside to assess her property by daylight, the task ahead seemed even more impossible than it had the night before. But Samuel had said to make a list, so she found paper and pencil in her belongings and began to write. Water source, she noted first, and set out to find the creek. She discovered it about a quarter-mile east of the house, running clear and cold over smooth stones, bordered by cottonwood trees that would provide some shade and wood. She filled her canteens and water barrel, grateful for this one blessing. Back at the house, she continued her list. Roof repair, wall repair, floor repair, fence reconstruction, barn rebuilding, livestock acquisition, seed for planting, tool purchase, and on until her hand cramped and her spirits sank. She had $500 left after purchasing the land and her supplies. It would not be nearly enough. Margaret was sitting on the tilted porch, staring at her overwhelming list, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see Samuel riding toward her on a handsome bay horse, leading a pack mule behind him. Despite her exhaustion and discouragement, she felt her spirits lift at the sight of a friendly face. Samuel dismounted and tied his horse to one of the few remaining fence posts. He was dressed for work in sturdy trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a battered hat that shaded his eyes. "Morning, Margaret. How was your first night?" "Terrifying and uncomfortable," she admitted honestly. "But I survived it." He smiled at that. "That is what matters. May I look around, see what we are working with?" "We," Margaret questioned. "If you will have the help," Samuel said. "I told you I do ranch work for others when they need an extra hand. I figured you might could use a hand, and I've got time before my next job starts. Cannot afford to work for free, but my rates are fair." Margaret looked down at her list, then back at Samuel's open, honest face. "I cannot afford to pay what you are worth, I suspect." "How about we work out a trade?" Samuel suggested. "You help me with something I need, and I will help you get this place functional. No money needed." "What could I possibly help you with?" Margaret asked, genuinely curious. Samuel looked slightly embarrassed. "I saw all those books in your wagon. You said you were a teacher back east. I can read some, but not well, and I cannot write much beyond my name. Always meant to learn properly, but there is never time and no school for adults around here. If you would be willing to teach me reading and writing proper-like, I would be willing to help you fix this place up." Margaret felt a swell of emotion in her chest. Here was something she could offer, a skill that had value even in this rough territory. "I would be honored to teach you, Samuel." "When would you like to start? How about we do mornings for lessons and afternoons for work?" he proposed. "That way we are both learning and building at the same time." They shook hands on it, and Margaret felt the calluses on Samuel's palm, the strength in his grip. This was a man who knew hard work intimately, and he was offering to share that knowledge with her. The laughter from the auction crowd seemed very far away now. Samuel spent the rest of that day assessing the property with a practiced eye, making notes of his own and asking Margaret questions about what she hoped to do with the land. By evening, he had created a plan of action that felt far more manageable than Margaret's panicked list. "First thing is making the house safe and weather-tight," he explained as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Winter comes hard and fast out here, and you have got maybe 6 weeks before the first snows. We fix the roof, patch the walls, shore up that floor. Get a good stove in here for heat and cooking. Make sure you have got a solid door that closes proper." "That sounds expensive," Margaret said quietly. "Some of it will cost money, yes," Samuel agreed, "but a lot of it is just labor and knowing what to do. I can get lumber from the sawmill at cost because my father does business with the owner. We can reclaim some wood from the barn ruins. I know how to patch a roof and fix a floor. What we cannot scavenge or make, we will purchase only what is absolutely necessary." "And after the house?" Margaret asked. "Then we worry about fencing and livestock in that order. No point in getting animals if you cannot keep them contained. Come spring, we will worry about planting. The land has been fallow for 3 years, which means it should be good and ready to grow, but that is months away. First, we survive the winter." Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed that felt almost natural. Each morning, Margaret and Samuel would sit at the makeshift table he had built and work on lessons. She started him with basic alphabet review, then moved quickly into simple words and sentences. Samuel proved to be a dedicated student, practicing his letters each evening by lamplight and approaching learning with the same focused determination he brought to physical work. The afternoons were spent on the house. Samuel taught Margaret how to properly swing a hammer, how to measure and cut boards, how to mix mortar and patch holes. Her hands blistered and bled, her muscles ached in places she had not known existed, but she persisted. Slowly, almost miraculously, the house began to transform. They replaced the roof shingles section by section, with Samuel working on the dangerous heights while Margaret handed up materials and learned by watching. They reinforced the sagging wall with new posts and braces. They patched holes, replaced broken windows with oiled paper until they could afford glass, and shored up the dangerous floor. Samuel installed a cast iron stove that one of his friends was selling, and suddenly, Margaret had heat and the ability to cook hot meals. During those long days of working side by side, Margaret learned more about Samuel's life. He was 26 years old, the eldest of 4 children. His family had come west full of dreams of prosperity, and for a few years, those dreams had seemed possible. But a devastating winter had killed most of their herd, and the bank had foreclosed on their land before they could recover. His younger brother had gone to seek work in the gold mines of the Black Hills. His 2 sisters had married and moved to different territories. His father had retreated into bitterness and drink, leaving Samuel to hold the family together as best he could. "Why did you stay?" Margaret asked one afternoon as they worked on repairing a section of fence. "You clearly have the skills to work anywhere. Why remain in Yankton?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, stretching wire tight between posts. "I guess because leaving feels like admitting defeat. My father gave up on his dream, my siblings scattered to chase theirs. I keep thinking if I just work hard enough, save enough money, I can buy back our land or start fresh somewhere nearby. Keep the dream alive, you know." "I understand that," Margaret said softly. "That is why I came here. My father spent the last years of his life drowning in failure and bottle. I could have stayed in Philadelphia, found work as a governess or companion, lived a safe and small life. But I wanted to prove that the Warren name could mean something again, even if I had to come to the edge of the world to do it." Samuel looked at her with those steady hazel eyes. "You are going to do it too, I can tell. You have got the kind of stubborn I recognize." "The same kind you have?" Margaret asked, smiling. "Exactly the same," he agreed, returning her smile with one that made her heart skip in a way she had not expected. As September turned to October, the work continued. Word had apparently spread through the territory about the Eastern woman fixing up the Thornton place, because people began to stop by out of curiosity. Some came to mock, but found their sneers fading when they saw the solid new roof and the smoke rising straight from the chimney. Others came with genuine offers of help or advice. Neighbors Margaret had not known existed stopping by with tools to loan or materials to spare. An older rancher named Dutch Sorensen rode by one morning and spent an hour telling Margaret about water rights and grazing patterns. A homesteader woman named Ingrid brought fresh bread and told Margaret about the winter vegetables that grew well in the territory. Even the town clerk who had handled her purchase stopped by to drop off some old furniture he no longer needed, including a real bed frame and mattress. "Folks are starting to respect what you are doing here," Samuel observed one evening as they ate dinner together, something that had become a comfortable habit. "You are proving them wrong, just like I thought you would." Margaret looked around her transformed house. It was still rough and simple, but it was solid and warm and unmistakably hers. "We are proving them wrong," she corrected. "I could never have done this without you, Samuel." He ducked his head, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "You are paying me with the lessons, fair trade." But it had become more than a fair trade, and they both knew it. Samuel could have learned his letters from anyone, and Margaret could have hired any ranch hand. What had developed between them over those weeks of working side by side was something neither had expected, but both were beginning to depend upon. The reading lessons had progressed remarkably well. Samuel could now read simple books and write clear sentences, his large, work-roughened hands learning to control a pencil with increasing precision. Margaret had discovered that teaching out here, one-on-one with a motivated student, was far more rewarding than managing a classroom of disinterested city children had ever been. More than that, she had discovered that she enjoyed Samuel's company in a way that went beyond mere gratitude. She found herself watching for his arrival each morning, her heart lifting at the sound of hoofbeats. She noticed small things about him: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet competence of his movements, the gentleness he showed with the horses, and the care he took with her property as if it were his own. And sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch, something warm and wondering that he quickly hid whenever she met his eyes. The first snow came in late October, just as Samuel had predicted. It was a light dusting that melted by noon, but it served as a reminder that winter was approaching fast. They intensified their efforts, working longer days to complete the essential preparations. Samuel helped Margaret purchase her first livestock, using his knowledge to select healthy animals at fair prices: 3 milk cows, a dozen chickens, and 2 sturdy mules that could serve for both riding and work. They rebuilt a small section of the barn, just enough to shelter the animals through winter, using salvaged wood and creative problem-solving. Margaret learned to milk the cows, gather eggs, muck out stalls, and 100 other tasks that books had never prepared her for. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned despite her efforts to wear a bonnet, and her soft teacher's body developed lean muscle from constant physical work. One afternoon in early November, as they were finishing repairs on the chicken coop, Samuel suddenly stopped working and turned to Margaret with an expression she could not quite read. "There is something I need to tell you," he said, his voice serious. "I have been offered a job on a ranch down south near the Nebraska border. Good pay, steady work through winter. I told them I would let them know by week's end." Margaret felt her stomach drop. "That sounds like an excellent opportunity." "It would be," Samuel agreed, "if I wanted to take it. But the thing is, I find myself not wanting to go. I keep thinking about who would check on you during the winter storms, who would help if something broke or an animal got sick. I keep thinking about our morning lessons and how I am just starting to read well enough to enjoy a book. I keep thinking about a lot of things." He stepped closer, close enough that Margaret could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, close enough to make her heart race. "But mostly," he continued quietly, "I keep thinking about how I have spent the last 2 months looking for excuses to see you, to spend time with you, to make you smile. And I keep wondering if maybe you might feel the same way." Margaret knew she should be cautious, should think carefully about the implications, should consider propriety and reputation, and all the things a proper Philadelphia woman was supposed to consider. Instead, she reached out and took Samuel's hand. "I would miss you terribly if you left," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These past months, working with you, learning from you, just being with you, it has been the happiest I have felt in years. Maybe ever. I do not know what that means exactly, but I know I do not want it to end." Samuel's face broke into a smile that transformed his serious features into something beautiful. "I was hoping you would say something like that. Because I have been falling in love with you, Margaret Warren, pretty much since the day I watched you drive that wagon out of town with your chin up and your back straight, determined to prove everyone wrong." "I have been falling in love with you too," Margaret admitted, feeling a weight lift from her chest as she spoke the truth aloud. "Though I tried not to, tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or the strangeness of this new life. But it is more than that. You are more than that." Samuel raised her hand to his lips and kissed her work-roughened knuckles with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. "I do not have much to offer you. No land of my own, no fortune, just a strong back and a stubborn heart. But I can promise to work hard every day to help you build this dream of yours. If you will have me, I would like to stay. Not as a hired hand or a student, but as something more, if you are willing." "I am willing," Margaret said, and then Samuel was kissing her properly, his lips warm against hers, his arms strong and sure around her waist. She melted into the embrace, into the certainty of his affection, into the promise of a future she had not dared to imagine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably do this proper," he said. "Court you right with flowers and walks and all that. You deserve that." "We have been working together every day for 2 months," Margaret pointed out, laughing. "I think I know you better than most women know their husbands after years of marriage. I know you sing off-key when you think no one is listening. I know you are patient with frightened animals and scared women. I know you read every night even though it is hard for you because you are determined to improve yourself. I know you are kind and honest and true. What more could courtship tell me?" "When you put it that way," Samuel said, grinning, "I suppose we have been courting all along, just calling it something else." They decided to keep their understanding private for a few more weeks, wanting to savor the newness of it without outside interference. But the change in their relationship was palpable, adding a warmth and joy to their days that had nothing to do with the work they accomplished. Samuel began staying later into the evenings, and they would sit by the fire talking about their hopes and dreams, their pasts and their futures. He told her about his mother, a strong woman who had worked alongside her husband as an equal partner, and how he had always hoped to find a woman with that same strength. Margaret told him about her years of feeling trapped in Philadelphia society, teaching other people's children while longing for a life of her own choosing. "You miss the city?" Samuel asked one night as they sat close together on the small porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "Not even a little bit," Margaret admitted. "I miss some of the conveniences, I suppose. Hot baths drawn by servants, dresses that do not need mending every week, shops with everything you could want. But I do not miss the life. The pretending, the small talk, the constant judgment. Out here I can be myself. I can work hard and see the results of that work. I can fail or succeed on my own merits. That freedom is worth more than any convenience." "You are remarkable," Samuel said, pulling her closer. "You know that. I am just a woman who took a chance," Margaret replied. "But having you here, building this life together, that is what makes it remarkable." November brought harder weather, snow that stayed on the ground and temperatures that dropped below freezing. But the house held firm, the stove kept them warm, and the animals were safe in their rebuilt shelter. Margaret and Samuel continued their routine, though now their lessons included not just reading and writing, but also teaching each other about their different worlds. She taught him about literature and history, the wider world beyond the Dakota Territory. He taught her about reading weather signs, understanding animal behavior, the 1,000 subtle skills required to survive on the frontier. They began making plans for spring, talking about what crops to plant and where to expand the fencing. Samuel drew up designs for a proper barn, something they could build together when the weather turned. Margaret calculated their finances, figuring out how to make every dollar stretch to cover their needs. In early December, Samuel rode into town and returned with a small wooden box. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, he presented it to Margaret with shaking hands. "I know we have not talked about timing," he said nervously. "And I know we should probably wait until spring when we can do this proper. But I also know that I do not want to spend another day without you knowing my full intentions." Margaret opened the box to find a simple gold band, small and unadorned but perfect. "Samuel, Margaret Warren, will you marry me?" he asked, dropping to one knee beside her chair. Will you let me spend the rest of my life helping you prove everyone wrong, building this ranch, building a family, building a future together?" "Yes," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that spoke of all the days and nights to come, all the challenges they would face together, all the joy they would find in each other. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Yankton. Dutch Sorensen gave Margaret away, standing in for the father she had lost. Ingrid and several other Territory women helped Margaret alter a simple blue dress into something special. Samuel wore his best clothes and looked more nervous than Margaret had ever seen him. The same people who had laughed at Margaret's auction bid filled the church pews, but now their expressions held respect and even admiration. In just 3 months, the Eastern school teacher had transformed an abandoned wreck into a working ranch, and everyone knew she had not done it alone. Samuel Brennan, the quiet man who worked odd jobs and kept to himself, had found himself a partner worthy of his loyalty. After the ceremony, the community held a dance at the town hall, and Margaret discovered that Samuel was as bad at dancing as he was at singing. But she loved him all the more for his cheerful lack of grace. They celebrated late into the night, surrounded by neighbors who were becoming friends, building the community connections that would sustain them through the hard times to come. That night, in the house they had rebuilt together, Samuel carried Margaret over the threshold and set her down gently in front of the warm stove. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan," he said softly. "I have been home for months," Margaret replied, reaching up to cup his face. "Ever since you decided to help the crazy woman who bought the broken-down ranch." "Best decision I ever made," Samuel murmured against her lips, and then there were no more words, only the warmth of their love and the promise of their future. The winter proved harsh, with blizzards that sometimes kept them housebound for days at a time. But those forced confinements became precious time together, reading aloud by firelight, planning for spring, learning the rhythms of married life. Samuel proved to be a thoughtful husband, attentive and affectionate, his earlier reserve melting away in the privacy of their home. Margaret discovered depths to her own capacity for happiness she had never known existed. The work was still hard, the challenges still real, but facing them with Samuel beside her made everything not just bearable but somehow beautiful. The simple act of sitting across from him at breakfast, of working together to care for their animals, of falling asleep in his arms each night, filled her with a contentment she had never imagined possible. In late January, when a particularly fierce storm trapped them inside for 3 days, Samuel finally finished reading his first complete book, a novel Margaret had brought from Philadelphia. The pride and joy on his face when he closed the final page was something she would treasure forever. "I did it," he said wonderingly. "I actually read a whole book, every word." "You did," Margaret confirmed, her heart full. "You should be proud. You have worked so hard." "Could not have done it without you," Samuel said, pulling her onto his lap. "You have given me so much, Margaret. Not just the reading, but the confidence that I could learn, that I am capable of more than just working with my hands." "You have given me everything," Margaret replied. "A home, a purpose, a love I never thought I would find. We have given these gifts to each other, Samuel. That is what makes us work." As winter slowly released its grip, and the first hints of spring appeared, they began to implement their plans. Samuel started building the new barn, a project that would take months but would transform the ranch. Margaret started seeds inside for the garden, planning the crops they would plant in the still frozen fields. In March, Margaret realized she had missed her monthly courses, and felt a flutter of excitement mixed with fear. She waited another week to be certain, then told Samuel over breakfast on a sunny morning when the snow was finally beginning to melt. "I think I am with child," she said quietly, watching his face carefully. Samuel froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Then a smile spread across his face, growing wider and brighter until he looked like he might burst with joy. "Truly, you are certain?" "As certain as I can be this early," Margaret confirmed. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Samuel set down his cup and came around the table to lift her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "Margaret, I am beyond happy. I am blessed. We are going to be parents." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "Should you be working? Is it safe?" "What do you need?" Margaret laughed at his instant protectiveness. "I am pregnant, not fragile. Women have babies while doing far more work than I do. But I will be careful, I promise. And we have months yet before the baby comes. Plenty of time to prepare." Those months flew by in a blur of work and preparation. Word spread about the coming baby, and the community rallied around them with surprising generosity. Women stopped by with baby clothes and advice. Dutch Sorensen brought a beautiful handmade cradle his late wife had used for their children. Even the ranchers who had laughed at Margaret's auction bid seemed to have accepted her as one of their own, offering tips about managing the ranch and children simultaneously. Samuel became even more protective as Margaret's belly grew, insisting on doing the heavy work and watching her constantly for signs of strain. But he also became even more tender, talking to the baby through Margaret's stomach, reading aloud in the evenings so their child would know his voice. The crops they planted that spring grew strong and tall, nourished by the rich soil and Margaret's careful attention. The animals thrived under their care. The new barn took shape board by board. The ranch that everyone had written off as worthless began to prosper, not through luck but through the determined effort of two people who refused to give up. In late September, almost exactly a year after Margaret had placed her bid at the auction, their son was born in the early morning hours. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Ingrid and two other experienced Territory women, with Samuel pacing anxiously outside until he was finally allowed to meet his child. "A boy," Margaret said tiredly, cradling the tiny bundle against her chest. "A strong, healthy boy." Samuel sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes wet with tears as he looked at his son. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." They named him Thomas, after Margaret's father, giving the name a new chance to mean something good and strong. Samuel proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, walking the floor with Thomas at night, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every tiny milestone. The first year of Thomas's life passed in an exhausting but joyful blur. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They purchased more cattle, expanded their fencing, planted more acres. Samuel's skill with horses became known throughout the territory, and he began a side business training and selling quality animals. Margaret's garden produced abundantly, and she learned to preserve food for the winter months, filling their small root cellar with evidence of their success. On the second anniversary of Margaret's auction bid, they threw a celebration at the ranch. It had become tradition in the territory, the day the Eastern woman had proven everyone wrong, and people came from miles around to see how far the Brennan ranch had come. The broken-down house was now solid and expanded, with a new room added for Thomas and plans for more. The barn stood finished and full of healthy animals. The fields were golden with wheat ready for harvest. Fences stretched straight and strong in every direction. It was everything Margaret had dreamed and more than she had dared to hope. As the sun set on the celebration, with neighbors dancing and children playing and Thomas asleep in his cradle, Margaret stood with Samuel looking out over their land. "You remember how they laughed?" she asked softly. "I remember," Samuel replied, pulling her close against his side. "I also remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met, willing to risk everything on a dream." "It was not much of a risk," Margaret said. "I had nothing to lose and everything to gain." "The real bravery was yours, deciding to tie your fate to a foolish Eastern woman with no experience and too much stubbornness." "Not foolish," Samuel corrected. "Brave, stubborn, determined, brilliant. Never foolish. You saw what this land could be and you made it real. We made it real together." "Together," Margaret agreed. "That is the word that matters most." The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and failed crops, injuries and illnesses. But there were also abundant harvests and healthy births, both of livestock and children. 2 years after Thomas came a daughter they named Catherine, with her mother's dark hair and her father's hazel eyes. 3 years after that came another son, Daniel, born during a spring rainstorm and blessed with both parents' stubborn spirit. Samuel continued to improve his reading and writing, eventually becoming well-educated enough to serve on the town council. Margaret became known throughout the territory for her breeding stock and her knowledge of sustainable farming practices. Together, they built not just a ranch but a legacy. The Brennan Ranch became a success story told throughout the Dakota Territory, proof that determination and partnership could overcome any obstacle. Young couples starting out would come to ask their advice. Immigrants arriving from the East would stop by to see what was possible. The ranch became a symbol of hope and possibility on the frontier. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their now substantial house watching their children play in the yard, Samuel took Margaret's hand and kissed it gently. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving Philadelphia, spending all your money on this place, taking such a risk?" Margaret looked at the life they had built together, at the children they had raised, at the man she loved more with each passing year. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "This is exactly where I was meant to be, with exactly who I was meant to be with. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to find my way here." "You found your way exactly when you were supposed to," Samuel replied. "Any earlier, and I might not have been ready to meet you, to appreciate what an extraordinary woman you are. Timing is everything." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Margaret thought about the young woman who had stepped off the train in Yankton nearly 11 years ago, frightened and determined and alone. That woman had bet everything on a broken-down ranch and found not just success but love, family, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. As the years continued to pass, the Brennan Ranch grew from a successful operation to one of the most prosperous in the territory. Thomas grew into a capable young man who loved the land as much as his parents did. Catherine showed a gift for working with horses that rivaled her father's natural talent. Daniel proved to have his mother's head for business and numbers. When the Dakota Territory prepared for statehood in the late 1880s, Samuel was asked to serve as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention. Margaret accompanied him to the proceedings, one of the few women present, and her practical insights about land management and water rights were instrumental in shaping policies that would govern the new state. The people who had laughed at Margaret's auction bid were long since silenced, many of them now coming to the Brennans for advice or loans during hard times. Margaret and Samuel never forgot those early struggles, and they were generous in helping others establish themselves, creating a network of mutual support that strengthened the entire region. In the spring of 1890, now in their early 40s and with their children growing toward adulthood, Margaret and Samuel took a day away from the ranch to ride out to the creek where they had first begun to rebuild. The cottonwood trees had grown taller, and the water still ran clear and cold over smooth stones. "I came here that first morning after I bought the place," Margaret remembered, dismounting and walking to the water's edge. "I was so scared, Samuel. I had no idea what I was doing, and everything seemed impossible. But this creek, this beautiful clean water, it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I could make it work." Samuel joined her at the water's edge, slipping his arm around her waist in the comfortable way of long married couples. And then a stubborn cowboy showed up offering to trade work for reading lessons. "The best trade I ever made," Margaret said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "The best trade we both made," Samuel corrected. "You gave me literacy and confidence and purpose. But more than that, you gave me a partnership I had never dared to dream of. You are not just my wife, Margaret. You are my partner in every sense, the person who makes me better and stronger and braver." "You did the same for me," Margaret replied. "When everyone else laughed, you believed. When I did not know how to proceed, you taught me. When I was alone, you stood beside me. We built this life together, equal partners from the very beginning." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water and the wind in the cottonwoods, remembering all the years that had brought them to this moment. "What do you think happens next?" Margaret asked eventually. "The children will grow up and start their own lives. We will not always have them around to help with the work. Then we adjust," Samuel said practically. "Same as we always have. Maybe we focus more on the horse training, less on crops. Maybe we hire more help. Maybe we slow down a little, enjoy the fruits of all this labor. But whatever we decide together." "Together," Margaret repeated, the word that had defined their entire marriage. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, the house lights visible from miles away, welcoming them home, Margaret thought about how perfectly her life had turned out. Not perfect in the sense of easy or without struggle, but perfect in the sense of meaningful and full and real. She had come west with nothing but determination and desperation, and she had found everything that mattered. A home she had built with her own hands. Work that gave her purpose and satisfaction. Children who would carry on the legacy she and Samuel had created. And most precious of all, a love that had grown from mutual respect and partnership into something deep and unshakable. The Brennan Ranch stood as testament to what was possible when courage met opportunity, when determination met support, when two people committed to building something together. The broken-down property that everyone had dismissed as worthless had become a thriving operation worth thousands, but its real value could not be measured in dollars or acres. Its true worth lay in the life that had been built there, the family that had been raised there, the love that had flourished there. Margaret had proven the doubters wrong, but she had not done it alone. Samuel had stood beside her every step of the way, not just helping but partnering, not just supporting but truly sharing in every aspect of their life together. As the years rolled on into the new century, the Brennans became one of the founding families of the newly formed state of South Dakota. Their children married and started families of their own. Thomas took over the main ranch operations. Catherine married a neighboring rancher and combined their properties into an even larger spread. Daniel moved to the growing city of Sioux Falls but remained involved in the family business, handling sales and contracts. Samuel and Margaret, now silver-haired and lined with age but still strong and active, built a smaller house on the property, leaving the main house to Thomas and his family. They spent their days doing the work they loved at a gentler pace, surrounded by grandchildren who listened wide-eyed to stories of the early days, of the broken-down ranch, and the woman brave enough to buy it. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 generations of Brennans filled the house and yard, along with neighbors and friends who had become extended family over the years. Samuel stood to offer a toast, his hand steady as he raised his glass. 30 years ago, I married a woman everyone thought was foolish for buying the worst property in the territory. I knew better. I knew she was brave and determined and stronger than she looked. But I had no idea how much she would change my life, how much we would build together, how much love and joy and purpose she would bring into my world. He turned to Margaret, his eyes still holding the same warmth that had drawn her to him all those years ago. Margaret Brennan, you took a broken-down ranch and made it bloom. But more importantly, you took a broken-down cowboy who thought his best days were behind him, and you gave him a reason to dream again. Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us, on this life we have built together. Margaret stood and joined him, taking his hand as tears streamed down her face. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Thank you for teaching me what partnership truly means. Thank you for every day of the last 30 years, the hard ones and the easy ones, the struggles and the triumphs. Thank you for being exactly who you are. They kissed to applause and cheers from their family and friends, and the celebration continued late into the night. As the years advanced, Samuel and Margaret gradually stepped back from active ranch work, content to advise and support while their children took the lead. They spent their time together, still learning and growing, still reading aloud in the evenings, still walking hand in hand across land they had reclaimed from ruin. Samuel lived to the age of 73, passing peacefully in his sleep with Margaret beside him, surrounded by the family they had created together. His funeral was attended by hundreds, testament to the respect and affection he had earned throughout his life. Margaret lived another 5 years, staying active and engaged, delighting in her growing tribe of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, content with the perfect partnership she had known. When she finally passed at the age of 75, she was laid to rest beside Samuel under the cottonwood trees by the creek, the place where their journey had truly begun. The Brennan Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own improvements while honoring the foundation that Margaret and Samuel had built. The story of the Eastern woman who bought the broken-down ranch and the cowboy who helped her prove everyone wrong became family legend, told and retold, inspiring each new generation to face their own challenges with courage and determination. The main house, expanded and modernized over the years, still stood on its original foundation, the bones of the structure that Margaret and Samuel had so painstakingly rebuilt still strong and true. In the parlor hung a photograph from their 10th anniversary, Margaret and Samuel standing together with their 3 children, their expressions showing pride and love and satisfaction. It remained there through all the years that followed, a reminder of where everything had started, of what was possible when 2 people committed to building something together. The ranch became known throughout South Dakota, not just for its success, but for the story behind that success. Historians came to document the early days. Researchers studied the sustainable practices Margaret had pioneered. The Brennan name became synonymous with quality livestock and fair dealing. But beyond the business success, beyond the historical significance, the true legacy of Margaret and Samuel Brennan was the example they set of partnership, perseverance, and love. They proved that circumstances of birth did not determine destiny, that courage could overcome mockery. That partnership built on mutual respect could weather any storm. The auction where everyone laughed became the beginning of a story that would inspire generations. The broken-down ranch became a symbol of possibility, and the cowboy who helped prove them wrong became the love of a lifetime, the partner in building not just a successful ranch but a life of meaning and purpose and deep, abiding joy. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and the passage of time. But the love they shared, the life they built, and the legacy they left behind continued to ripple outward, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring dreams they would never see fulfilled. In the end, Margaret Warren, the Eastern school teacher who gambled everything on a broken-down ranch in the Dakota Territory, won far more than she could have imagined. She won respect, success, family, and a place in history. But most precious of all, she won the heart of Samuel Brennan, the steady cowboy who saw her courage when others saw only foolishness, who stood beside her when others walked away, who loved her completely and was loved completely in return. Together, they proved that the greatest success is not measured in acres or dollars, but in love shared, challenges overcome, and a life well lived. They proved that partnership is the foundation of all lasting achievement. And they proved, beyond any doubt, that the people who laugh loudest at your dreams are often the ones who will marvel most at your success. The broken-down ranch became a thriving legacy. The laughter turned to respect. And two people who took a chance on each other built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes, a testament to the power of courage, determination, and love.